Officer Patricia Hawkins had been monitoring the castle's security feeds for 12 years, and she prided herself on her attention to detail and unwavering professionalism. When she saw Queen Consort Camilla enter the jewelry room at such an unusual hour, her first instinct was curiosity rather than suspicion. But as she watched the events unfold on her monitor, curiosity quickly transformed into alarm and then into a profound sense of duty-bound obligation. Now, sitting across from both Camilla and Sergeant Mitchell in the small, windowless security office, Patricia felt the weight of an impossible decision. The evidence was undeniable. She had watched every moment of the attempted theft, recorded in high-definition clarity that left no room for alternative interpretations. "Your Majesty," Patricia began, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. "I've served this institution faithfully for over a decade. In that time, I've seen many things that required discretion, many situations that needed to be handled with sensitivity. But I've never faced anything quite like this." Camilla sat rigidly in her chair, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. The fluorescent lighting in the security office was harsh and unforgiving, stripping away any remaining pretense or royal mystique. Here, she was simply a woman who had been caught attempting to steal priceless artifacts. "I understand the gravity of what you witnessed," Camilla replied quietly. "And I understand that you have procedures to follow, responsibilities to uphold. But I'm asking you to consider the broader implications before you decide how to proceed." Patricia's expression remained neutral, but Mitchell could see the internal struggle playing out behind her eyes. She was a woman who had built her career on following rules and maintaining order, yet she also understood that some situations demanded creative solutions to prevent greater harm. The security footage shows clear evidence of unauthorized access and attempted theft, Patricia stated matter-of-factly. "Standard protocol requires immediate reporting to the head of palace security, who would then inform the private secretary to the king. From there, the matter would likely reach His Majesty within hours." The implications hung heavy in the air. Charles would be devastated to learn of his wife's betrayal, particularly so soon after ascending to the throne and during a time when the monarchy needed stability above all else. The scandal would dominate headlines worldwide, overshadowing the legacy of Queen Elizabeth and potentially causing irreparable damage to the institution. "There has to be another way," Camilla said, her composure finally beginning to crack. "Some way to handle this that doesn't destroy everything. I know what I did was wrong, inexcusably wrong, but the consequences would extend far beyond just me." Sergeant Mitchell found himself in the unexpected position of mediator between duty and discretion. His military training emphasized following orders and maintaining chain of command, but his years of service had also taught him to consider the strategic implications of his actions. "Officer Hawkins," he said carefully, "what would happen to the footage if it were determined that this incident fell under special circumstances requiring alternative handling?" Patricia looked at him sharply, understanding immediately what he was suggesting. "You're asking me to compromise evidence in a criminal matter. That's not just a breach of protocol. It could be considered obstruction of justice. I'm asking you to consider whether the greater good might be served by finding a solution that protects the institution while still ensuring that justice is served in an appropriate manner," Mitchell replied. "There are precedents for handling sensitive royal matters through internal channels." The room fell silent as Patricia weighed her options. She had dedicated her life to protecting the royal family, but that protection had always been understood to work within the framework of law and proper procedure. What they were asking her to do challenged the very foundations of her professional identity. "If I were to consider alternative handling," she said slowly, "what assurances could be provided that similar incidents would never occur again? What measures would be put in place to prevent any repetition of this lapse in judgment?" Camilla looked up with a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I would accept whatever oversight or restrictions you deem necessary. Regular psychological evaluation, constant supervision when accessing sensitive areas of the castle, formal agreements about my conduct. Anything that would provide assurance of my future behavior. And there would need to be consequences," Patricia continued, her tone becoming more authoritative. "Real consequences that reflect the seriousness of what almost happened here. The fact that the items were returned doesn't erase the intent or the breach of trust. Mitchell nodded in agreement. A formal internal disciplinary process, with documentation that would remain on file. Restricted access privileges, mandatory counseling, and, perhaps most importantly, a personal acknowledgement from Her Majesty of the gravity of her actions and her commitment to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again. As the three of them worked through the possibilities, a framework began to emerge, one that would hold Camilla accountable while protecting the monarchy from a potentially catastrophic scandal. It was not a perfect solution, and it required all of them to operate outside normal parameters, but it offered a path forward that preserved both justice and institutional stability. The security footage would need to be classified under royal privilege, Patricia said finally. Access restricted to the three of us, and one senior official who could oversee the alternative disciplinary process. The incident would be recorded in confidential files, but not processed through normal criminal justice channels. Camilla felt a tremendous wave of relief, but it was tempered by the understanding that her actions had forever changed her relationship with the institution she had tried to serve. The trust that had been broken would take years to rebuild, if it could ever be fully restored. "I want you both to know," she said, looking directly at Patricia and then at Mitchell, "that I will spend the rest of my life trying to prove worthy of the chance you're giving me. What I did was a betrayal of everything this institution represents, and I will not forget the gravity of that betrayal or the mercy you've shown in finding an alternative to public exposure." 3 weeks later, Camilla sat in her private study, reviewing the formal agreement she had signed. The restrictions on her movement within the castle were significant. Her access to sensitive areas was now constantly monitored, and she was required to meet weekly with a royal psychiatrist to address the underlying issues that had led to her actions. More importantly, she had been required to write a detailed personal account of the incident and her motivations, a document that would remain sealed but available to future monarchs as a reminder of the constant vigilance required to protect the integrity of the crown. The emerald necklace, the diamond earrings, and the ruby ring remained safely in their cases, but Camilla could no longer look at them without remembering the moment when she had almost thrown away everything for the sake of possessing objects that could never truly belong to anyone. King Charles remained unaware of the incident, though Camilla often wondered if he sensed the change in her demeanor, the new humility and careful attention to protocol that had replaced her previous confidence. She had been given a second chance, but she understood that it was truly her last chance, and that understanding shaped every decision she made. Sergeant Mitchell was promoted to head of jewelry security, a position created specifically to prevent any future incidents. Officer Patricia Hawkins received a commendation for her handling of a sensitive security matter, though the details remained classified. And, in a small, windowless office deep within Windsor Castle, a security recording remained locked away, evidence of a crisis that had been resolved through the careful application of justice, mercy, and an unwavering commitment to protecting an institution that was larger than any individual, no matter how highly placed they might be. The story of that early morning encounter became a closely guarded secret, known only to 3 people who had found a way to serve both truth and the crown, proving that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is knowing when to bend the rules in service of a higher purpose. Sergeant James Mitchell had served the crown for 15 years, and in that time he had witnessed many unusual situations, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Standing before him was the queen consort, clearly in possession of items that did not belong to her, caught in circumstances that could only be described as theft. The weight of protocol and loyalty warred within him. His duty to the crown was absolute, but Camilla was now part of that very crown he had sworn to protect. Yet the evidence before his eyes was undeniable. The open jewelry cases, her guilty expression, and the telltale signs that she had taken items that belonged to the royal collection. "Sergeant Mitchell," Camilla began, her voice attempting to regain its usual commanding tone, "I can explain my presence here. There are preparations for upcoming ceremonies that require, with respect, Your Majesty." Mitchell interrupted gently but firmly, "I've been responsible for security in this section of the castle for 3 years. I'm familiar with all authorized procedures for accessing this room, and I'm afraid this doesn't appear to be one of them." Camilla's composure began to crack under the steady gaze of the guardsman. She had underestimated the thoroughness of the security protocols and, more dangerously, the integrity of the man now standing between her and escape. James Mitchell was not the type of guard who could be intimidated or bribed. His loyalty was to the institution, not to individuals, regardless of their rank. "You don't understand the pressures I've been under," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The Queen's death, the constant scrutiny, the feeling that I'll never truly belong in this world. These pieces, they represent something more than jewelry. They're symbols of acceptance, of belonging to something greater than myself." Mitchell listened without interruption, his expression remaining neutral but not unkind. He had been trained to handle delicate situations, and he recognized that he was dealing with someone who was emotionally compromised. Yet his duty remained clear, regardless of the personal circumstances involved. "Your Majesty, I understand that this has been an incredibly difficult time for everyone in the royal family. But what you're describing doesn't change the fact that these items belong to the crown, and removing them without authorization is." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's a very serious matter." Camilla sank into a nearby chair, the weight of her actions finally settling upon her. The emerald necklace felt heavy in her pocket, no longer a prize to be claimed, but evidence of a terrible lapse in judgment. She looked up at the sergeant, seeing not just a guard but a young man who was struggling with an impossible situation. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Do you arrest the Queen Consort? Do you call the police? Do you wake King Charles and destroy his faith in the woman he chose to marry?" Mitchell had been asking himself the same questions from the moment he had opened the door. The standard protocol was clear, but the circumstances were unprecedented. No guidebook existed for handling the discovery of royal theft, especially when the perpetrator held such a high position within the very institution she had betrayed. "I need you to return the items to their proper places," he said finally. "All of them. And then, we need to determine how this situation can be resolved without causing irreparable damage to the monarchy." Camilla nodded slowly, reaching into her pockets and carefully extracting the 3 pieces she had taken. The emerald necklace caught the light as she placed it back in its case. The diamonds sparkled mockingly as she returned the earrings to their velvet-lined compartment, and the ruby ring seemed to burn her fingers as she set it back in its designated spot. "I want you to know," she said as she completed this shameful task, "that I never intended for it to go this far. It started as just a fantasy, imagining what it would be like to own something that had been so close to Elizabeth. But fantasies have a way of becoming obsessions, and obsessions can drive people to do things they never thought possible." Mitchell watched her carefully, noting the genuine remorse in her voice, but also understanding that remorse alone could not undo what had nearly happened. The security footage would show her unauthorized entry, her time in the room, and her interaction with the jewelry cases. Even if the items were returned, evidence of the attempted theft would exist. "There's something else you need to know," he said reluctantly. "The security cameras in this room are monitored in real time by the Central Security Office. The night's supervisor, Officer Patricia Hawkins, has likely seen everything that's transpired here. We may not be the only ones who know about this incident." The blood drained from Camilla's face as the full implications of his words sank in. She had been so focused on avoiding the guards that she had completely forgotten about the surveillance system. Her careful planning, her attention to timing and access, all of it had been rendered meaningless by technology she had failed to consider. "How many people will see the footage?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "That depends on how Officer Hawkins chooses to handle the situation. She could report it immediately through official channels, which would mean it reaches the highest levels of palace security within hours. Or," he paused, considering his options, "or she might be willing to discuss alternatives, depending on how this matter is addressed." Mitchell realized that he was now actively participating in what could be considered a cover-up, but he also understood the broader implications of exposure. A scandal involving the Queen Consort and attempted theft of the crown jewels would not only destroy Camilla's reputation, but could potentially destabilize the monarchy itself during a crucial transition period. I need to speak with Officer Hawkins, Camilla said, standing up with new determination. If there's any chance of containing this situation, I have to try. The damage to Charles, to the institution, to everything Elizabeth worked so hard to build, it would be devastating. I can arrange that conversation, Mitchell replied. But you should understand that Officer Hawkins is known for her strict adherence to protocol. She's not someone who can be easily swayed by rank or title. As they prepared to leave the jewelry room, Camilla turned back one final time to look at the cases she had opened, the precious items she had almost stolen. The weight of her actions pressed down upon her like a physical force, and she realized that regardless of what happened next, she would have to live with the knowledge of what she had been willing to do. Mitchell secured the room and escorted Camilla through the quiet corridors toward the security office. With each step, the gravity of the situation became more apparent. They were not just walking toward a conversation with Officer Hawkins. They were walking toward a moment that would determine whether the monarchy could survive its newest scandal intact. The early morning lights streaming through the castle windows seemed to mock their situation, illuminating a path forward that was fraught with danger and uncertain outcomes. Behind them, the jewelry room stood silent once again, its precious contents safe, but forever marked by the memory of what had almost been lost. As they approached the security office, both Camilla and Mitchell knew that the next few hours would determine not only their own fates, but potentially the future of the institution they had both, in their own ways, sworn to serve and protect. The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Camilla Parker Bowles adjusted her black mourning dress one final time. The Queen's funeral had been 3 weeks ago, but the weight of grief still pressed down on the entire royal household. Yet beneath her carefully composed exterior, Camilla harbored thoughts that would have shocked the nation. Standing before the ornate mirror in her private chambers, she studied her reflection with calculating eyes. The crown jewels, the Queen's personal collection, the priceless tiaras and necklaces that had adorned Elizabeth II for over 70 years. All of it now technically belonged to the crown. But the transition period created opportunities. Opportunities that a clever woman might exploit. Camilla had spent months quietly observing the palace routines, noting when certain areas were less guarded, when staff rotations occurred, and, most importantly, when the precious jewels were moved between their secure locations. She had befriended Margaret Thornberry, the elderly keeper of the Queen's jewelry, with carefully timed conversations about the historical significance of each piece. The Burmese ruby tiara, Margaret had confided during one of their tea sessions, was always Her Majesty's favorite for state dinners. Such a shame it might spend years locked away now. The old woman's eyes had grown misty, and Camilla had nodded sympathetically while mentally cataloging this information. The plan had begun forming during those long, solemn weeks following the Queen's passing. Camilla reasoned that certain pieces, the smaller, less frequently photographed items, might not be missed immediately. A sapphire bracelet here, a diamond brooch there. Nothing too obvious, nothing that would appear in official portraits or state occasions. She convinced herself that Elizabeth would have wanted her to have them, that after all her years of service to the crown, she deserved something more substantial than mere titles and public appearances. The security protocols were thorough but not impenetrable. Camilla had noticed that during the 4 a.m. shift change, there was a brief window when the jewelry rooms in the Tower of London were monitored by a single guard. More importantly, she had observed that certain pieces were temporarily stored at Windsor during the complex process of cataloging the Queen's personal effects. Her opportunity came when she learned that several items would be moved from Windsor to the Tower on a Thursday morning. The transport would require additional security, meaning the usual guards at Windsor would be reassigned. It was then that Camilla decided to act, choosing 3 specific pieces she had been admiring for years: the Queen's personal emerald necklace, a pair of diamond earrings gifted by foreign dignitaries, and a small but exquisite ruby ring that had belonged to Queen Mary. Thursday arrived gray and drizzling, perfect weather for Camilla's purposes. She dressed casually but elegantly, as if preparing for a quiet morning walk through the castle grounds. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she made her way through the familiar corridors, nodding politely to staff members who were accustomed to seeing her everywhere in the castle. The jewelry storage room was located in the private royal quarters, accessible through a series of increasingly secure doors. Camilla's status as queen consort gave her access to most areas of the castle, though the jewelry room itself required special authorization. However, she had managed to obtain Margaret Thornberry's access card during a staged stumble in the hallway the previous day, apologizing profusely while helping the older woman gather her scattered belongings. As she approached the final corridor leading to the storage room, Camilla's palms grew damp with nervous perspiration. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, visualizing every step, every movement. The card reader beeped softly as she swiped Margaret's access card, and the heavy door clicked open with a sound that seemed thunderous in the quiet hallway. Inside, the room was smaller than she had imagined, lined with climate-controlled display cases and secure safes. The lighting was soft but precise, designed to showcase the incredible beauty of the royal collection while protecting the precious metals and stones from damage. Camilla moved quickly but carefully, her practiced eye immediately locating the 3 pieces she had selected. The emerald necklace was even more stunning up close, its deep green stones seeming to glow with an inner fire. The diamond earrings sparkled like captured starlight, and the ruby ring held a warmth that spoke of centuries of royal history. As she carefully placed each item in the specially lined pockets of her coat, Camilla felt a mixture of triumph and guilt that made her hands shake slightly. She was just securing the final clasp when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy, measured steps that belonged to palace security. Camilla froze, her mind racing through possible explanations for her presence in the jewelry room. She could claim she was there on official business, reviewing pieces for an upcoming ceremony, but her casual clothing and the early hour would make such an excuse difficult to believe. The footsteps paused directly outside the door. Camilla held her breath, praying that whoever it was would continue on their rounds without entering. But then came the distinctive sound of a key being inserted into the lock, and she realized with growing horror that her time had run out. The door opened slowly, and standing in the doorway was Sergeant James Mitchell of the Coldstream Guards, his imposing figure filling the frame. His sharp eyes took in the scene immediately. Camilla standing among the open jewelry cases, her face pale with shock, and the obvious bulges in her coat pockets that suggested she was not there for an innocent visit. "Your Majesty," Sergeant Mitchell said quietly, his voice carrying a note of surprise and deep concern. "I wasn't expecting to find anyone here at this hour." Camilla's mind raced desperately for an explanation that might salvage the situation. She straightened her shoulders, attempting to summon the authority of her position, but she could see in the sergeant's steady gaze that he had already drawn his own conclusions about what he had discovered. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and the weight of what this moment would mean for everyone involved. Outside, the morning rain continued to patter against the windows, the only sound in a room where the course of royal history was about to take an unexpected and dramatic turn. Sergeant Mitchell stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft but final click. His eyes never left Camilla's face as he spoke again, and his words carried the weight of duty that had defined the Coldstream Guards for centuries. "I think we need to have a conversation, Your Majesty. A very serious conversation indeed."